So, when you think about colonial New Mexico, you probably don't picture this. But in the early days, the lines of power weren't just blurry, they were full on battle lines. We're not talking about a simple chain of command here. This was a crazy power struggle, with two rulers fighting for control over the very same colony.
And that really boils down to one central question, right? Who has more power, a royal governor or the head priest? And believe me, this wasn't some philosophical debate. It was a real-world, knockdown, drag-out fight between the state and the church. And to really get how wild this got, we've got to start at the most shocking moment of the whole story.
All right, let's dive right in. A governor under arrest.
Yeah, you read that right. In 1613, the head priest of New Mexico arrested the colony's royal governor. And not just arrested, he took control himself. I mean, how on earth does something like that even happen? Well, to understand it, you have to look at how this whole colony was set up from the get-go.
It all comes down to this: two rulers, one colony.
Okay, so picture this. Starting in 1610, New Mexico basically had two governments running at the same time in the same place. It's like having two captains on one ship. You had the civil government, led by the royal governor in Santa Fe, handling all the day-to-day stuff. And then you had the religious government, run by the head priest, the custodio, whose entire mission was converting the native Pueblo people. You can probably see where this is going, right? Two different goals, two different bosses, they were bound to crash into each other.
So that head priest I mentioned, his official title was the custodio. He was the big boss of the religious government, overseeing every single church and mission matter for the Franciscan priests in the whole territory.
Now, over on the civil government side, the governor wasn't just acting alone. He had advisors, a group called the Cabildo. Think of it as the elected town council for Santa Fe, helping him manage things for the Spanish settlers.
And it wasn't just in the capital. Spread out across the colony, you had these other local officials called alcaldes mayores. The easiest way to think of them is like local judges and peacekeepers, whose job was to handle disputes between the Spanish settlers and the Pueblo Indians.
But here's where it gets even more complex, and actually pretty interesting. The Spanish officially recognized that the Pueblo people had their own local governments. They called them republicas, and in these, the communities could actually elect their own local leaders. So it's not just two governments, it's really three layers of power all operating in the same space. A recipe for conflict for sure.
So with all these different leaders and governments running around, you have to ask, what were they even fighting about? It really boils down to one thing: labor, specifically the labor of the Pueblo people.
See, both the church and the state needed the Pueblo Indians to succeed. The priests, well, they wanted to save souls, right? Their goal was conversion. The government, on the other hand, wanted to make the colony profitable, and that meant they needed a workforce. And these two competing interests slammed right into each other over one very controversial system.
And that system was called the encomienda. So what was it? Basically, it was a grant from the Spanish king. It gave a settler control over a group of Pueblo families. And this is a really important point. It wasn't about owning the land, it was about having the right to the labor and tribute of the people on that land.
Okay, so here's how the encomienda system was supposed to work, at least on paper. First, a Spanish settler gets the grant for a certain number of Pueblo families. Second, those families owe that settler tribute every year, plus their labor. But in return, and this is step 3, the settler had to provide them with protection and make sure they got religious instruction from the local priests. So in theory, it was this two-way street.
So what does tribute actually mean? We're not talking about something abstract here. It was a very real tax. Every single year, each Pueblo family had to pay up 1 bushel of corn and 1 blanket. Now, there were laws that said the settlers had to treat them fairly, but the priests were constantly accusing the settlers of abusing the system and exploiting the people. And you can bet that just poured gasoline on the fire between the church and the state.
So you've got all this tension bubbling just beneath the surface, and it was only a matter of time before it all blew up. And it did, in a massive personal showdown between two incredibly powerful and incredibly stubborn men.
So in one corner, you have Governor Pedro de Peralta. He's the colony's first royal governor, sent to establish the king's law, period. And in the other corner, you have Fray Isidro Ordóñez, the head priest, the custodio. This is a man who believed his authority didn't come from some king, it came directly from God. You can see the problem, right? These were two guys who were never, ever going to share the spotlight.
And it all came to a head in 1613. Governor Peralta shows up, tries to lay down the law, and Fray Ordóñez immediately pushes back, challenging him on the whole encomienda system. Things got heated. The argument spilled out into the open, there was even violence, and then Ordóñez plays his trump card. This final, absolutely shocking move. He arrests the governor, the king's chosen representative.
And get this wasn't just some symbolic gesture to make a point. For an entire year, a full year, Fray Ordóñez, the priest, was the one calling the shots. He was the actual ruler of New Mexico. He had managed to use the power of the church to totally upend the power of the state. It's incredible.
So as you can imagine, an event this dramatic, well, it had some major fallout. The consequences of this power struggle would be felt in the colony for decades to come.
I mean, just try to put yourself in the shoes of a Pueblo person watching all this go down. The Spanish show up, claiming they have absolute authority, saying they speak for a king on earth and for God in heaven, and now you see them literally fighting each other in public. Who are you supposed to listen to? It must have been so confusing.
The consequences of this whole mess were pretty clear. For one, it showed everyone that push come to shove, the church could actually overpower the state. For another, it created total confusion for the Pueblo population about who was really in charge. And maybe most importantly, all this infighting just fundamentally weakened Spanish authority across the board, really setting the stage for even more conflict down the road.
So yeah, the story of New Mexico's two rulers is a fascinating, dramatic slice of history. But it also leaves us with a bigger question, one that's just as relevant today. When leaders get so wrapped up in their own fights for power, who's the one that really ends up paying the price?